For the next step in our example, we're going to do some computation, and we're going to be computing the location of some different placement points along those curves. So I'm going to start by just setting up a code block to create some parameters for points along those curves. So based on the number of placement points I want to have, 0 to 1 to the number of placement points, I'll use the curve pointed parameter. Okay, then we're basically going to apply that to the two different curves. That'll have a series of two different sets of parallel points, one on each curve. Then I'm going to think about just arranging those points to start placing components. Now, when I want to connect things between the two different curves, so basically join the similar placement points on the two different curves, I'll use a list transpose, and that'll group the points that are in the parallel positions across the different curves. That one's actually very easy, very straightforward. The end-to-end is a little bit harder. The other thing I want to do is basically join the points end-to-end. Okay, so I can go through and kind of have a list of points that go from the kind of start of one to the end of the first, and then the end of the first to the end of the second, and the end of the second to the end of the third, and so on. So really just connecting the dots. And to do that, what we're going to have to do is basically go through and create something called the list rest of items. What rest of items does is it takes a list and it basically strips off the first item and then just slides everything forward. So it offsets things so that what was the second item is now the first item in a new list that's created. The net effect of doing that is if I do a list create that joins the original and list rest of items, is that I'm pairing up each point with the next point. And that basically gives us this ability to go through and have them be end to end. Okay, I can take those two lists, transpose that'll gather the pairs. And then I do need to do one final little operation. I'm going to need to remove the final pair because for the final ending point, it's pointing to a null location. There's no final point to go with it since there was nothing after it. So I just need to remove the last pair since it's just uneven right now. It doesn't have an endpoint. But again, let's just kind of see that all in action. It'll probably make more sense to see than it is to hear me ramble on about it. So let's come on over. So the idea is we have a list of two different curves, and I want to basically place some points on those curves. So I'm going to have 20 placement points, I decided. I'm going to bring those curves in. Okay, this is just going 0 to 1 with 20 different points in there. So I can basically place some little placement points on there. And there you have them. Okay, so now I have a lot of placement points. Next, I want to go through and think about basically connecting things pairwise. So that is to basically connect this point with that point, this point with that point. And the idea is if I have these two different lists of points, okay, I just basically want to grab things in each of the same positions and pull them together. And the transpose function is very good for that. So if I transpose these things, I now have instead 20 different lists of 2 as opposed to 2 lists of 20. And let's just kind of watch that so you can sort of see what they look like. So those points are going to be the points for basically placing the elements that connect the two curves vertically. Okay, let's now go back and think about how we can connect them end to end, because that's a little bit, again, more complex. What I'm going to do is actually kind of break down these two different curves because I want to do an end-to-end on the lower curve as well as an end-to-end on the upper curve. So what I'm going to do is use a kind of a little function which pulls elements of a list. This is the 0th element, and that's the first element. The 0th element will be the lower curve. The first element will be the upper curve. But basically, I'm going to separate those two because what I need to do, I can't do to both curves at the same time. So I'm basically going to take those two different curves, actually the curve points, and separate out the first list and the second list. Oops, let's pull those together. When I run that, you'll see that this is now just the first list. There's only 20 items in it. Okay, Now we're ready to take those 20 points and basically start joining them end to end. And the way we do that is if you take a look at this list of the 20 points, what I want to do is basically strip off that 0th point and shift everything up and join the first to the 0th, the second to the first, the third to the second. And to do that, what I'm going to do is do rest of items. That'll give me the 19 points. And then I'm going to basically join that to the original list, or list created. And when I run this, I have these two different lists, one after the other. Now that's kind of okay, but it's not what I want. What I need is to join them pairwise. So I'm going to transpose it, and that'll take the two lists and basically join them in to a series of different pairs. Okay, so that's the 0th to the first to the second, second to third, things like that. Now this works out pretty well, except for this very last point. This last point has a null in it, and we won't be able to plot that. So what we're going to do is basically just count the list to figure out what the index of the last item is. So if there's basically, 19 items in the list. All right, take that, 20 items in the list. The index of the last one is 19. So what I'm going to basically do is take that curve point list, count it. You'll see there's actually 19 things in there. Then I'm going to remove the 19th item using list remove at index. Whew. What does all that do when we're done? It basically gives us a list of now all the end-to-end points on the lower curve and all the end-to-end points on the upper curve. So we have all our different groups of points together. We are now ready to start placing some adaptive components.